The Supreme Court is generally a hostile place for death row prisoners, but they picked up a real win on Wednesday. Barely. To be clear, there's no anti-death penalty revolution underway at the court that helped carry out Donald Trump's execution spree and waning days of his presidency. Instead, Justice Sotomayor's 5-4 opinion in Cruz versus Arizona shows that if a state makes a ridiculous enough argument, then sometimes maybe they'll lose it by a razor-thin margin. Here's how it happened, with apologies for some brief background that's necessary to understanding the decision. The 1994 Supreme Court ruling in Simmons versus South Carolina said that when future dangerousness is at issue, whether a defendant will continue to pose a threat to society, that defendant can tell the jury they are ineligible for parole if the jury doesn't sentence them to death. That can make a difference to jurors who might want to sentence someone to death but are concerned that a seemingly dangerous defendant could be released in the future. Arizona, however, resisted applying the Simmons precedent for years, to the point that the Supreme Court in 2016 had to issue a ruling that essentially told the state, hey, you have to abide by the law. Naturally, Justice Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito dissented from that 2016 ruling in Lynch versus Arizona. Then we get the case of John Montenegro Cruz, who was sentenced to death after being blocked from telling the jury that he couldn't be paroled. And he lost an initial appeal before the Lynch decision in 2016. After Lynch, he cited a state procedural rule that allows a challenge when there's been a significant change in the law that, if applicable to the defendant's case, will probably overturn the defendant's judgment or sentence. Yet, somehow the Arizona Supreme Court said that the 2016 ruling in Lynch wasn't a significant change, pointing out how ridiculous that is. Justice Elena Kagan, at oral argument last year, had to say this about the state's position. I think Kafka would have loved this. Cruz loses his Simmons claims on direct appeal because the Arizona court says point blank Simmons has never applied in Arizona. And then he loses the next time around because the Arizona court says Simmons always applied. Kagan's point was persuasive, but given the court's pro-death penalty bent, I wasn't certain at all that Cruz would win, even being ably represented by Neil Katyal, a former acting solicitor general and an MSNBC legal analyst. Here's what he had to say on Twitter. Yes, it's a win. Justice Sotomayor says that the Arizona Supreme Court adopted a novel view of the law to try to deny death row inmates relief. Justice Barrett dissents, joined by Justice Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch. Justice Sotomayor's made a majority opinion. Unquote. But on Wednesday, a bare majority of the court agreed to rule against the state once again. Arizona tried to insulate its stupefying state ruling on technical grounds, but Sotomayor observed that this is an exceptional case that rests on a novel and unforeseeable state court procedural decision lacking fair or substantial support in prior state law, and so federal review is appropriate. Unsurprisingly, Sotomayor was joined by her two fellow Democratic appointees, Kagan and Justin Kennedy Brown Jackson. More surprisingly, Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh also joined. As I noted above, this doesn't mean that the court has undergone a revolution by any stretch. After all, it's an exceptional case, as Sotomayor wrote. Nonetheless, Arizona almost pulled off its legal heist if Justice Amy Coney Barrett's dissent had its way. Barrett actually called the state's position kind of artificial and hair-splitting at the oral argument, but she wound up leading the way in dissent, joined unsurprisingly by Thomas and Alito, who dissented in the 2016 Lynch case, and Justice Neil Gorsuch, who, along with Thomas Alito, is one of the most likely justices to rule against the death row prisoners. Indeed, Barrett's dissent was so far as to call the majority opinion jarring. I think that's a good way of describing how far some of the justices are willing to go to help the government turn the machinery of death.